Okay, we're back. So we want to, and I kind of got to give me a little curve there, to think about our end in mind. And I said we would not go over 1 and 3, and we're not. Those of you who submitted those questions, you should have gotten some feedback, and so we're going to move right on. If you've not submitted those guides, it's very important that you do, because remember, some of these questions cycle back around on your test, and if you have no feedback or you have gotten the question totally wrong, then it can come back to bite you on the test, and that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for failures at this point. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to make a good grade. So I need your participation to kind of get there. Our end in mind is I will compare and contrast events, characters, and situations in our story. And that's really what we're looking at doing today with our day 4. Vocabulary is behind me, and we're just going to kind of leave it there for now. I want you to think about, how does Jonas learn about color? And I don't want you to say, well, the giver told him. But I want you to think about the process of how Jonas learned about color. All right, some of you are thinking. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is that even without the giver giving him hints about color initially, that Jonas was starting to pick up these quick glimpses of color before that. He had seen the color in the apple. He had caught the color of Fiona's hair. And then he had seen the tones of red in the people's faces. So it took the giver to really explain to him what he was seeing and to solidify what those tones really were. So he learns about color by the experiences that he starts to have. And that's kind of what we're looking at now. I want us to pick up, I feel like I'm just kind of at a weirdness today, and well, all this week in these videos. I feel like I can't get my camera just right. We want to go back to page 128. Because we're just going to jump in. This is a lot of reading today. Giver, Jonas asked once as they prepared for the day's work, "Don't you have a spouse? Aren't you allowed to apply for one?" Although he was exempted from the rules against rudeness, he was aware that this was a rude question. But the giver had encouraged all of his questions, not seeming to be embarrassed or offended by even the most personal. And the giver chuckled. "No, there's no rule against it, and I did have a spouse. You're forgetting how old I am, Jonas. My former spouse lives now with the childless adults." Oh, of course, Jonas had forgotten the giver's obvious age. When adults of the community became older, their lives became different. They were no longer needed to create family units. Jonas's own parents, when he and Lily were grown, would go to live with the childless adults. "You'll be able to apply for a spouse, Jonas, if you want to, but I'll warn you, though, that it will be difficult. Your living arrangements will have to be different from those of most families. Because the books are forbidden to citizens, you are the only ones with access to the books." And Jonas glanced around at the astonishing array of volumes. From time to time now, he could see their colors with their hours together. His and the giver's, consumed by conversation and by the transmissions of memories. Jonas had not yet opened any of the books, but he read the titles here and there and knew that they contained all of the knowledge of centuries and that one day they would belong to him. So if I have a spouse and maybe children, I will have to hide the books from them. And the giver nodded. I wasn't permitted to share the books with my spouse. That's correct. And there are other difficulties too. You remember the rule that says the new receiver can't talk about his training? And Jonas nodded. Of course he remembered. It had turned out by far to be the most frustrating of the rules he was required to obey. When you become the official receiver, when we're finished here, you'll be given a whole new set of rules. Those are the rules that I obey. And it won't surprise you that I am forbidden to talk about my work to anyone except the new receiver. That's you, of course. So there will be a whole part of your life which you won't be able to share with a family. It's hard, Jonas. It was hard for me. You do understand, don't you, that this is my life, the memories? And Jonas nodded again, but he was puzzled. Didn't life consist of things you did each day? There wasn't anything else, really. I've seen you taking walks, he said. And the giver sighed. I walk, I eat at mealtimes, and when I am called by the committee of elders, I appear before them to give them counsel and advice. Do you advise them often? Jonas was a little frightened at the thought that one day he would be the one to advise the ruling body. So I want us to think about our end in mind. I will compare and contrast events, characters, and situations in the story. And I want you to think about how the receiver's family life is different from other people's family lives. And that is a situation, okay? So think about what I just read. How is the giver's family dynamic different than what Jonas's current family dynamic is like? Sorry, had to do that eyes. Well, there's a really big difference. And that being is that the receiver, the receiver, that's the older man, he was not allowed at all to tell his family anything. So he had secrets that he had. In Jonas's family unit, there are no secrets. They are encouraged to share absolutely everything. So go back to thinking about they're sharing their dreams every night. They're sharing what they did all throughout the day. Every family member is sharing. And then think about the receiver when he goes home at the end of the day. What is he allowed to really talk about? Nothing that has to do really and truly with his job or his life. And that may be where that rule comes into play that says you can lie. I mean, he may at some point have to make up a life that he can actually share. Just a thought. All right, let's take a back reading again. But the giver said no, rarely, only when they are faced with something that they have not experienced before. Then they call upon me to use the memories and advise them. But it very seldom happens. Sometimes I wish they had asked for my wisdom more often. There are so many things that I could tell them, things I wish they would change, but they don't want change. Life here is so orderly, so predictable, so painless. It's what they've chosen. I don't know why they even need a receiver then if they never call upon him, Jonas commented. They need me and you, the giver said, but didn't explain. They were reminded of that 10 years ago. What happened 10 years ago? Jonas asked. Oh, I know. You tried to train a successor and it failed, but why? Why did that remind them? And the giver smiled grimly. When the new receiver failed, the memories that she had received were released. They didn't come back to me. They went. And he paused and seemed to be struggling with the concept. I don't know exactly. They went to the place where memories once existed before receivers were created. Someplace out there. And he gestured vaguely with his arm, and then the people had access to them. Apparently, that's the way it was once. Everyone had access to the memories. It was chaos, he said. They really suffered for a while, and finally it subsided as the memories were assimilated. But it certainly made them aware of how they need a receiver to contain all that pain and knowledge. But you have to suffer like that all the time, Jonas pointed out. And the giver nodded. And you will. It's my life and it will be yours. And Jonas thought about it and about what it would be like for him, along with walking and eating, and he looked around the walls of books. Reading? That's it. And the giver shook his head. Those are simply the things that I do. My life is here, in this room. And the giver shook his head. And he put his hands to his own face and to his chest. No, here is my being, where the memories are. My instructors in science and technology have taught us about how the brain works, Jonas told him eagerly. It's full of electrical impulses. It's like a computer. If you stimulate one part of the brain with an electrode, And he stopped talking, and he could see an odd look on the giver's face. They know nothing, the giver said bitterly. Well, Jonas was shocked, and since the first day in the annex room, they had together disregarded the rules about rudeness, and Jonas felt comfortable with that now, but this was different. And far beyond rude, this was a terrible accusation. What if someone heard? And he glanced quickly at the wall speaker, terrified that the committee might be listening as they could at any time. But as always, during their sessions together, the switch had been turned off. Nothing, Jonas whispered nervously, but my instructors. And the giver flicked his hand as if brushing something aside. Oh, your instructors are well trained. They know their scientific facts. Everyone is well trained for their job. It's just that without the memories, it's all meaningless. They gave that burden to me and to the previous receiver and the one before him. And back and back and back, Jonas said, knowing the phrase that always came. And the giver smiled, though his smile was oddly harsh. That's right. And next it will be you. A great honor. Yes, sir. They told me that at the ceremony. The very highest honor. Well, some afternoons the giver sent him away. And without training, and Jonas knew on days when he arrived to find the giver hunched over, rocking, his body slightly back and forth, his face pale, that he would be sent away again. Go, the giver told him tensely. I'm in pain today. Come back tomorrow. On those days, worried and disappointed, Jonas would walk alone beside the river. The paths were empty of people except for the few delivery crews and landscape workers here and there. Some children were all at the child care center after school, and the older ones busy with volunteer hours or training. By himself, he tested his own developing memory. He watched the landscape for glimpses of green that he knew were embedded in the shrubbery when it came flickering into his consciousness. He focused upon it, keeping it there, darkening it, holding it in his vision as long as possible until his head hurt and he let it fade away. He stared at the flat, colorless sky, bringing blue from it. He remembered sunshine until finally, for an instant, he could feel warmth. He stood at the foot of the bridge that spanned the river, the bridge that citizens were allowed to cross only on official business. Jonas had crossed it on school trips, visiting the outlying communities, and he knew that the land beyond the bridge was much the same, flat and well ordered, with fields for agriculture. The other communities he had seen on visits were essentially the same as his own. The only differences were slightly altered styles of dwellings, slightly different schedules in the school, and he wondered what lay in the far distance where he had never gone. That land didn't end beyond those nearby communities. Were there hills elsewhere? Were there vast wind-torn areas like the place he had seen in memory? The place where the elephant died. Now, I'd like you to look at your questions, and these are the questions that we first went over yesterday, where I made a mistake. So you may have already broken them down, but I am going to let you have just a moment to look at those. All right, so you should have that kind of taken care of. And here we go. I told you today was a lot of reading, so I didn't lie about that. Top of 135. Giver, he asked one afternoon, following a day when he had been sent away, "What causes you pain?" And when the giver was silent, Jonas continued, "Well, the chief elder told me at the beginning that the receiving of memory causes terrible pain. And you described for me that the failure of the last new receiver released painful memories to the community. But I haven't suffered, Giver, not really." And Jonas smiled. "Oh, I remember the sunburn you gave me on the very first day, but that wasn't so terrible. What is it that makes you suffer so much? If you gave some of it to me, maybe your pain would be less." And the giver nodded. "Lie down," he said. "It's time, I suppose. I can't shield you forever. You'll have to take it all on eventually." "Let me think," he went on. And when Jonas was on the bed waiting, a little fearful, "All right," the giver said after a moment, "I've decided. We'll start with something familiar. Let's go once again to a hill and a sled." And he placed his hands on Jonas's back. Chapter 14. It was much the same, this memory, though the hill seemed to be a different one, steeper, and the snow was not falling as thickly as it had before. It was colder, also, Jonas perceived. He could see, as he sat waiting at the top of the hill, that the snow beneath the sled was not thick and soft as it had been before, but hard and coated with bluish ice. The sled moved forward, and Jonas grinned with delight, looking forward to the breathtaking slide down through the invigorating air. But the runners this time couldn't slice through the frozen expanse as they had on the other snow-cushioned hill. They skittered sideways, and the sled gathered speed, and Jonas pulled at the rope, trying to steer, but the steeriness and speed took control from his hands, and he was no longer enjoying the feeling of freedom, but instead, terrified, was at the mercy of the wild acceleration downward over the ice. Sideways spinning, the sled hit a bump in the hill, and Jonas was jarred loose and thrown violently into the air, and he fell with his leg twisted under him and could hear the crack of bone. His face scraped along jagged edges of ice, and when he came at last to a stop, he lay shocked and still, feeling nothing at first but fear. Then the first wave of pain. He gasped. It was as if a hatchet lay lodged in his leg, slicing through each nerve with a hot blade. In his agony, he perceived the word fire and felt flames licking at the torn bone and flesh. And he tried to move and could not. The pain grew, and he screamed, and there was no answer. Sobbing, he turned his head and vomited to the frozen snow. Blood dripped from his face into the vomit. "No," he cried, and the sound disappeared into the empty landscape, into the wind. Then, suddenly, he was in the annex room again, writhing on the bed. His face was wet with tears. Able to move now, he rocked his own body back and forth, breathing deeply to release the remembered pain. He sat and looked at his own leg and where it lay straight on the bed, unbroken. The brutal slice of pain was gone, but the leg ached horribly still, and his face felt raw. "May I have relief of pain, please?" he begged. It was always provided in his everyday life for the bruises and wounds, for a smashed finger, a stomach ache, a skinned knee from a fall from a bike. There was always a daub of anesthetic ointment or pill, or in severe instances, an injection that brought complete and instantaneous deliverance. But the giver said no and looked away. Limping, Jonas walked home, pushing his bicycle that evening, and the sunburn pain had been so small in comparison and had not stayed with him, but this ache lingered. It was not unendurable as the pain on the hill had been, and Jonas tried to be brave. And he remembered that the chief elder had said he was brave. "Is something wrong, Jonas?" his father asked at the evening meal. "You're so quiet tonight. Aren't you feeling well? Would you like some medication?" That Jonas remembered the rules. No medication for anything related to his training, and no discussion of his training. At the time for sharing of feelings, he simply said that he felt tired, that his school lessons had been unusually demanding that day. And he went to his sleeping room early, and from behind the closed door, he could hear his parents and sister laughing as they gave Gabriel his evening bath. They have never known pain, he thought. The realization made him feel desperately lonely, and he rubbed his throbbing leg, and he eventually slept. Again and again, he dreamed of the anguish and the isolation of the forsaken hill. Now, I want you to think about your questions, and is there any place that you can do evidence at this point? I'd like you to take a moment and just kind of jot that down. All right, have you just about gotten it? All right, so here we go. 139. The daily training continued, and now it always included pain. The agony of the fractured leg began to seem no more than a mild discomfort as the giver led Jonas firmly, little by little, into the deep and terrible suffering of the past. Each time in his kindness, the giver ended the afternoon with a color-filled memory of pleasure. A brisk sail on a blue-green lake, a meadow dotted with yellow wildflowers, and an orange sunset behind mountains. It was not enough to assuage the pain that Jonas was beginning now to know. Why? Jonas asked him after he had received a torturous memory in which he had been neglected and unfed. The hunger had caused excruciating spasm in his empty, distended stomach, and he lay on the bed aching. Why do you and I have to hold these memories? Why, it gives us wisdom, the giver replied. Without wisdom, I could not fulfill my function of advising the committee of elders when they call upon me. But what wisdom do you get from hunger? Jonas groaned. His stomach still hurt, though the memory had ended. Some years ago, the giver told him, before your birth, a lot of citizens petitioned the committee of elders. They wanted to increase the rate of births. They wanted each birth mother to be assigned 4 births instead of 3, so that the population would increase and there would be more laborers available. And Jonas nodded, listening. That makes sense. The idea was that certain family units could accommodate an additional child. And Jonas nodded again. Mine could, he pointed out. We have Gabriel this year, and it's fun having a 3rd child. The committee of elders sought my advice, the giver said. It made sense to them too, but it was a new idea, and they came to me for wisdom. And you used your memories? And the giver said yes. And the strongest memory that came was hunger. It came from many generations back, centuries back. The population had gotten so big that hunger was everywhere, excruciating hunger and starvation. It was followed by warfare. Warfare. It was a concept Jonas did not know, but hunger was familiar to him now. Unconsciously, he rubbed his own abdomen, recalling the pain of its unfulfilled needs. So you describe that to them. They don't want to hear about pain. They just seek the advice. I simply advise them against increasing the population. But you said that was before my birth. They hardly ever come to you for advice, only when they, what was it you said? When they have a problem they've never faced before. When did it happen last? Do you remember the day when the plane flew over the community? Yes, I was scared. So were they. They prepared to shoot it down, but they sought my advice, and I told them to wait. But how did you know? How did you know the pilot was lost? I didn't. I used my wisdom from the memories. I knew that there had been times in the past, terrible times, when people had destroyed others in haste, in fear, and had brought about their own destruction. And Jonas realized something. That means, he said slowly, that you have memories of destruction, and you have to give them to me because I have to get the wisdom. And the giver nodded. But it will hurt, Jonas said, and it wasn't a question. It will hurt terribly, the giver agreed. But why can't everyone have the memories? I think it would seem a little easier if the memories were shared. You and I wouldn't have to bear so much by ourselves if everybody took a part. And the giver sighed. You're right, he said, but then everyone would be burdened with and pained. They don't want that. And that's the real reason. The receiver is so vital to them and so honored. They selected me and you to lift that burden from themselves. When did they decide that? Jonas asked angrily. It wasn't fair. Let's change it. How do you suggest we do that? I've never been able to think of a way, and I'm supposed to be the one with all the wisdom. But there are 2 of us now, Jonas said eagerly. Together, we can think of something. And the giver watched him with a wry smile. Why can't we just apply for a change of rules? Jonas suggested. And the giver laughed. And then Jonas, too, chuckled reluctantly. The decision was made long before my time or yours, the giver said, and before the previous receiver, and he waited. Back and back and back, Jonas repeated the familiar phrase. Sometimes it had seemed humorous to him. Sometimes it had seemed meaningful and important. Now it was ominous. It meant he knew that nothing could be changed. Now the new child, Gabriel, was growing and successfully passed the test of maturity that the nurturers gave each month. He could sit alone now, could reach for and grasp small play objects, and he had 6 teeth. But during the daytime hours, Father reported that he was cheerful and seemed of normal intelligence. But he remained fretful at night, whimpering often, needing frequent attention. After all this extra time I put in with him, Father said one evening, after Gabriel had been bathed and was lying for the moment, hugging his hippo placidly in the small crib that had replaced the basket. I hope they're not going to decide to release him. Maybe it would be for the best, Mother suggested. I know you don't mind getting up with him at night, but the lack of sleep is awfully hard on me. Well, if they release Gabriel, can we get another new child as a visitor? Asked Lily. She was kneeling beside the crib, making funny faces at the little one who was smiling back at her. Jonas's mother rolled her eyes in dismay. No, Father said, smiling, and he ruffled Lily's hair. It's very rare, anyway, that a new child's status is as uncertain as Gabriel's. It probably won't happen again for a long time. Anyway, he sighed, they won't make the decision for a while. Right now, we're all preparing for a release. We'll probably have to make very soon. There's a birth mother who's expecting twin males next month. Oh dear, Mother said, shaking her head. If they're identical, I hope you're not the one assigned. I am. I'm next on the list. I have to select the one to be nurtured and the one to be released. It's usually not hard, though. Usually it's just a matter of birth weight. We release the smaller of the two. And Jonas, listening, thought suddenly about the bridge and how, standing there, he had wondered what lay elsewhere. Was there someone there waiting who would receive the tiny released twin? Would it grow up elsewhere, not knowing ever that in this community lived a being who looked exactly the same? And for a moment he felt a tiny fluttering hope that he knew was quite foolish. He hoped that it would be Larissa waiting. Larissa, the old woman he had bathed. He remembered her sparkling eyes, her soft voice, her low chuckle. Fiona had told him recently that Larissa had been released at a wonderful ceremony. But he knew that the old were not given children to raise. Larissa's life elsewhere would be quiet and serene as befit the old. She would not welcome the responsibility of nurturing a new child who needed feeding and care and would likely cry at night. Now that's where I stop. I want you to look at your questions before we kind of sign off here. And where or what would you do for evidence for your support? All right, now, the questions, you're going to be doing all 4 of the questions today in your journals, 1 through 4. And that's all I'm going to say. So 1 through 4, put those in your journal. and make sure you do your vocabulary and check those after yourself. And I'll see you in a bit. Bye, guys.